George somewhat cares about his job, he shows in this episode. And then the part of the woman that doesn't seem to attract George, attracts George in the end. So either way, it did not make a difference. And poor Jerry, he gets stuck taking Banya out to not one, but 2 meals again. After he got thrown into something in the middle of something he didn't even completely intend to, he does what he has to do. And then Kramer's moisturizer cream, of course, just ruined everything. What is going on, guys? This is the Secretary episode of Seinfeld. Another pretty good one. The next one, though we do the switch, is still one of my favorites. But before we get there, we gotta talk about the Secretary. This episode, of course, even though on the DVDs, they don't talk about it until the inside look for the race episode, the Secretary episode is actually the first episode where, I guess we'll probably talk about it in the race because of who else they tried to impersonate by the same philosophy they do with Steinbrenner. But, the Secretary is the first episode that we have, like, the Steinbrenner impersonator, who, of course, we all knew already that Larry David did the voice of Steinbrenner, but of course, as they couldn't get the real George Steinbrenner, they had Larry David doing the voice. They had some other guy sit in. His name was Lee Bear. He sat in as Steinbrenner, but you never saw his face. Because that's when he was being interviewed, he says he probably know me more familiar as this. Pretty much that. It made me think of, I had an old teacher in my music class when I was in middle school. He also played the organ at my church. So when he introduced himself the first year he actually came over as music teacher. He would say, before I start, most of you know me this way, but soon you'll get to know me this way. Let me fix my pop filter. Got bumped when I did the spin there. But basically that's what it made me think of. But, yeah. Basically, Larry David, of course, did the voice, and Lee Bear basically just put action to the voice. That Jason Alexander said, what he's doing is basically going with the same similar expression as he said. But, that's probably one of the big behind the scenes things about this episode in particular. But yeah, let's talk about it. Not too many stories really, around, the smaller stories. Kramer and his moisturizer cream and getting Uma Thurman's number. The big story, of course, is George being told by the Yankees he has to hire a secretary. And he gets to do the interviewing. Which, of course, Jerry mocks George, saying that you'll have someone else be taking calls from you instead of your mother. And you take calls for your mother or whatnot. Now he's saying that now his secretary will be taking calls from his mother or whatnot. But then George says that he thought about this. He's actually says, if I go with someone who is attractive, he'll never get any work done. It'll be very distracting. So he's going to go with unattractive for this secretary. Which seems very opposite of George. But obviously, working with the Yankees is a job that he actually does care about. And it's a job he actually does not want to lose. So, he's going to try to actually find someone he can still concentrate and do work with. And not think about getting in bed with this woman. Unfortunately, of course, that doesn't make a difference at all whatsoever, which we'll get to why momentarily. But while they were talking, Jerry was actually dropping stuff off at the dry cleaners. Which now there's some dry cleaner there named Willie. So not the same dry cleaner as back in the wife episode in season 5. So I'm guessing Jerry no longer gets that dry clean discount. I don't know. But he drops off a houndstooth jacket and his mother's fur coat that apparently Mrs. Seinfeld stores up at Jerry's apartment just so she has it when she comes up, I guess, since it's colder weather, obviously, and just really need it down in Florida. Of course, he's also, talks to Willie's wife briefly, and then, Willie just praises the heck out of Jerry's houndstooth jacket. Okay, no big deal there. So then, George goes back to work. He does the interviewing. He interviews two women who seem very qualified, have great office skills. But, of course, you even look at them and think, oh, they're pretty attractive. There's someone you would look as attractive. And George flats out says, you seem qualified, this and that. He goes, but you're super attractive. If I do anything to do this and this to you, basically. I'm sorry, it's not going to work. And then finally, the third person they showed was a librarian-looking woman named Ada, who was played by Vicki Lewis. I know Vicki Lewis is a person who played the Barrett Girl in an extremely goofy movie. I just watched that like a few weeks ago on Disney Plus, and one of my favorite, Disney movies, of course. But she actually was voiced the Barrett Girl, but of course, instead of being, like a hippie type girl there, she's more of like a librarian-looking woman right there, very brainy. Of course, she should be a good asset to the job. And the only question she had, though, was the fact that she does take care of her mother, so she asked if there would be many late nights, which George goes, I can't even imagine. So George obviously picks the most unattractive Ada, but he starts noticing that she's pretty smart. Very organized, she's on the point, snap of the fingers, she's on the ball, whatnot. So, it seems like, George was quite fascinated by her, how smart she is. And of course, that makes no difference. Because, in the end, George still falls for her because she may not be attractive with an image, but she has an attractive brain. Because George basically talks her into having sex in the office. So, her and George start making out, go on the floor, and then Ada's explaining, what to do, the best way to do this, and that. So it's she may not be good looking, but she has the brain to really attract a guy. So, obviously, she must have done an excellent job, because in the midst of the whole thing, George screams out, I'm giving you a raise! So, yes, 3 days in on the job, George says he's giving her a raise because of how good she was. It's something he didn't think he'd have to do with the secretary, because he went for unattractive, but yet, for the only few times in the series, he was more attracted to the brain rather than the outside. We'll get back to George and Ada in a bit. But, anyways, so, they had that going on. Jerry, of course, gave Willie his clothes to the dry cleaning stuff. Elaine had bought this dress at Barney's because there was a special going on there. She said when she wore it there, she loved it. It was stunning. Puts it on when she gets home, and she even shows the guys. She hates it. And Kramer, of course, even came in and saw it too, and he even agreed. So Elaine realized, she claims that Barney's has skinny mirrors. So she thinks that, what she sees at Barney's is misleading if you would have it at home. Which she thinks it's false advertising and whatnot. So she's going to be going back to Barney's to shop. Kramer agreed to go with her as he's trying to get some moisturizer cream or whatnot. But of course, Elaine wasn't too sure because it's not too often in the series we've seen Kramer and Elaine, just them one-on-one. I mean, a couple times we've seen it, where Elaine helped Kramer, pose as his wife and get that jacket back, or whenever Kramer posed as Elaine's boyfriend so she can get away from her psychiatrist, because she was dating him at the time. They didn't really explore it as much as in the one episode and several seasons ago, wherever George and Elaine were spending time alone together, and they had nothing in common to talk about, except for whenever they talked about Jerry. But of course, they do go to the movies. Well, while of course, George is at the office fooling around with Ada, and then Kramer gets Uma Thurman's number and writes it on Jerry's dry clean ticket. In the midst of this, though, as they're waiting for Kramer to get back, Jerry sees his dry cleaner, Willie, going into the theater. But he thinks that Willie is wearing the same houndstooth jacket he had dropped off to him at the dry cleaners earlier on the episode. So he's skeptical of it. And of course, Kramer gets the number. Elaine is planning on going back to Barney's and exchanging the dress because she doesn't like it. George is screaming out, "I'm giving you the raise," in the midst of having sex with the secretary. So the next day at Monk's, this takes place after the whole "I'm giving you a raise" scene. They're sitting there, Jerry and George are discussing it, and how, George obviously is not really in the power of giving raises. And they're discussing how they could, fix it. And Jerry says, "Well, you can have sex with her again, take it back." And George's like, "Not doing that." So finally, he says, "I want to go into Steinbrenner's office and tell her he has to give her a raise." And see how that goes. But of course, as they're leaving and they open up the, and Jerry reaches to his pocket to grab his wallet to pay for his bill for dinner, for lunch, whatever the heck they're having. And he feels something in his pocket. He pulls it out, and sure enough, it's a movie stub to the 9:30 show from the night that he went. And basically, he says that's proof that Willie the dry cleaner is wearing his clothes. So he goes back to Willie's, and he confronts him, and then, of course, Willie completely denies it. So then Jerry says, he's not going to give his stuff, give his business to someone who wears the clothes that he gives in. And he's acting like, you think, your dry cleaning place is just your own open closet and whatnot. But, of course, Jerry still needs to get his mother's fur coat back. But then, of course, Willie thinks and realizes that Donna is wearing the fur coat and she's out running errands while wearing that fur coat. So, but then Jerry, realizing he doesn't have his stub, realized that he left it in a suit he had let Kramer borrow because he I'm sorry. Kramer's wearing a suit. And he had the dry cleaning ticket on him because that had Uma Thurman's number on it. So, of course, Willie, realizing that, jumps and says, "You can't get your jacket back until you show a ticket." And Jerry's like, "I haven't shown a ticket at times before, you still gave me my stuff." And then basically Willie's like, things have changed and this and that and whatnot. So that's the excuse for, covering up as to as his wife being out with his mother's fur coat. So Jerry leaves and heads to Barney's because he knows that Elaine and Kramer were going there, as Elaine was going to be exchanging for a different dress. At Barney's, of course, Elaine tries on another dress. The woman thinks it looks great, but Elaine's not convinced because she's telling them that these mirrors are skinny mirrors and it's false advertising. So when the woman's not looking, Elaine walks away and wants to go outside to, find a better mirror to see if the dress works or not. Which she does, and she basically, doesn't like it. Of course, she goes back later on the episode and says that this dress is not going to work, but of course the lady realizes that, sees the salt on the bottom of the dress, and she tells her that Elaine went outside with that dress, so now she has to buy it. So Elaine's doomed and has to buy the dress anyways. Kramer, meanwhile, though, ran into Kenny Bania, while there. And of course, again, Bania's bragging about he's working out, he's huge, but he needs a new suit. And he basically bargains with Kramer for his. So I think he ended up selling them for like $300. So, exchange the suit, but then Kramer hides out in the woman's dressing room, claiming there's no problem with that at all, even though it ends up not working out for him. He peeks over while Elaine was getting changed into that dress earlier on, which Elaine was disturbed that Kramer did that, and he tells Elaine to call Jerry, tell him to bring him some clothes, because he had just sold Kenny Bania his suit. Well, Jerry came in looking for Kramer and Elaine. But of course, while he couldn't find either one of them, a woman was complaining that there was someone in the women's dressing room for like an hour. And then the fitting room lady or whatever heck it is, the store clerk, goes over, knocks on the door, saying, "Man, is everything okay in there?" And then we hear Kramer go, "Yeah." And then Jerry realizes that Kramer is in there. So he walks over, and then Kramer thinks that Jerry brought him the clothes, but Elaine never called Jerry yet or anything. So Jerry's all confused. So Jerry goes into the same dressing room as Kramer. Kramer's in his underwear, and again, it's like, where'd you do with your clothes? And then Jerry goes, and then Kramer goes, I told you, I sold them to Banya. I sold my suit to Banya for $300. He goes, "You mean what you were wearing?" And then he's like, "Yeah. How do you expect to get out of here?" And Kramer goes, "Well, I didn't think ahead." So, obviously, he's doomed. In the meantime, though, Banya comes back saying that the suit's no good. Kramer's moisturizer cream leaked and got all over the suit, and it was ruined. It's no good. So he wants the suit back. So Kramer didn't want it back because it was ruined. But yet Jerry had to get the suit back because his dry cleaning ticket was on it. And also Kramer wanted it back because Uma Thurman's number was on the ticket. And he hadn't had a chance to call Uma yet. So then they bargained for it. Then finally, after arguing back and forth, Banya didn't want to get the suit back. He wanted his money back. Kramer didn't want the suit back at all because it had moisturizer cream on it. Jerry agrees. Well, Jerry more so just wants the ticket. And Banya won't give Jerry the ticket unless Kramer gives him back the money for the suit. Jerry, desperate for that ticket to get his mother's fur coat back, agrees to take him out to a nice dinner, just like in the soup. And then Banya, though, says it has to be 2 dinners, and he gets to go to Mendy's. And then he's like, whatever. He accepts the offer. Jerry gets the ticket. He goes back into Kramer's dressing room. Kramer looks to get Uma's number first, but realizes the moisturizer cream had also gotten on the ticket, so it smudged out Uma's number, and it also smudged out the dry cleaning numbers. Jerry then tries to catch Banya before he leaves, but then Banya was like, "You can't do that, you promised me." And then Jerry's like, "Alright." And then as he leaves, and of course, as Elaine is sulking over the fact she has to still buy that dress, Jerry sees a woman and recognizes her as Donna, Willie the dry cleaner's wife. She's walking into the fitting rooms with the fur jacket on. And he's like, "Hey, isn't that my mother's fur coat?" He barges in there, opens the door, and she's like, "No, it's not." And then the door closed, and I guess Jerry fought her for the jacket, and she walks out, and Jerry had gotten the jacket. And basically Jerry didn't need a ticket in the end. So, and then of course, Jerry, Elaine, and Kramer leave as Kramer wore the fur coat, and they left Barney's, and Elaine had to purchase that dress because she took it outside. And of course, Jerry goes out to eat with Banya, and of course, he just hyped up the swordfish, and he's talking about what their next meal they can do, and of course, Jerry just basically tells him to shove. He doesn't care, basically. Now, getting back to George, though, because we got to finish up George's story. George does go and see Steinbrenner, and he talks, and of course, this is the first scene we see with, again, Larry David as a voice and Lee Baer doing the actions to the voice. George talks into giving Ada a raise. He says about how, her mother, is not well and all this other stuff. And basically, she's just like a bum. But of course, Ada gets a raise. But the raise ends up having her making more money than George. So then George goes back to Steinbrenner and complains about it. But again, Steinbrenner starts going on his long, stories that George just slowly makes his way out of the room as Steinbrenner goes on and on and on and on, rambling and whatnot. But, that's that. Oh, yeah, and also, I forgot to mention, too, Kenny Banya, before the moisturizer cream got all over the suit, had called Uma Thurman, and he got a date with Uma instead of Kramer. So, like I said in the last episode, Kenny Banya somehow, even though annoying as he is and drives Jerry nuts with his size 42 and him working out, "I'm huge," ends up getting a date with Uma Thurman. That son of a gun Banya. But that's what I thought of the Secretary episode. Again, good episode for sure. And whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, the big thing from this, again, was Lee Bear's first appearance as doing the actions for Steinbrenner. And, of course, George's line of, I'm giving you a raise! But, of course, George has another one of my favorite moments in the next episode, the switch. The switch. The switch. Can't be done. I wonder. What's that mean? You'll find out next. We also learn a very big secret, a long, well-hidden secret about Kramer in the next episode as well. What is that? You'll have to find out next when we get to the next episode, The Switch. So guys, what were your thoughts on The Secretary? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Until then guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your day. Peace out everybody.